Well, good morning or good afternoon, whichever time you are watching this. Um, it's Trudy, back again for some more stories. I've got some more really fun animal stories for you again today. And I'm happy to report that the sun is out and it's not too chilly. So maybe today is a day we can all feel a little better by taking a walk around the building or finding a spot in the sunshine to sit down for a while and chat with whoever else might be there. Anything to help the day pass more quickly and catch up on all the news. So let's get started. The first story that I'm going to read to you is by a pretty funny guy named Dave Barry. And I don't know if you'll find it funny, but it's clever. It's called Taking the Zip Out of Zippy. Maybe you have an inkling about what this is about. This adventure begins when Zippy went through puberty, a biological process that a small dog goes through in less time than it takes you to throw away your third-class mail. One minute Zippy was a cute little boy puppy scampering about the house, playfully causing permanent damage to furniture that is not yet fully paid for, and the next minute he was a man. When the new, mature version of Zippy sauntered into a room, you could almost hear the great blues musician, Muddy Waters, in the background growling, "I'm a man, yes I am, a full-grown man." Of course, in Zippy's case, full-grown means the size of a Hostess snowball, yet somehow less impressive. But in his own mind, Zippy was a major stud muffin, a hunk of burning love, a small caliber but high velocity projectile of passion fired from the Saturday night special of sex. And his target was Ernest. Now, Ernest is my female dog, but she was not the ideal choice for Zippy because all of her remotely suspicious organs had been surgically removed several years ago. Since that time, she had not appeared to be even dimly aware of sex, or much of anything else. Her lone hobby, beside eating, is barking violently at nothing. Also, she is quite large, and when she is standing up, Zippy can run directly under her with an easy 6 inches of clearance. So at first I was highly amused when he started putting the moves on her. It was like watching Tommy Tadpole hit on the Queen Mary. But shortly the novelty wore off, and I started feeling sorry for Ernest, who spent the entire day staring glumly off into dog hyperspace, while his tireless yarn ball-side passion machine kept leaping up on her, sometimes getting as high as mid-shin, and emitting these presumably seductive high-pitched yeps. "What's your sign? What's your sign?" So I decided it was time to have this veterinarian turn the volume knob of desire way down on the stereo system of Zippy's manhood, if you get my drift. The next morning, Ernest was limping, so I decided to take both dogs to the vet. They bounded enthusiastically into the car. Of course, dogs feel very strongly that they should always go with you in the car in case the need should arise for them to bark violently at nothing right in your ear. When I got to the veterinarian's office, they realized they had been tricked and went into full reverse thrust. But fortunately, the floor material there is slippery enough to lunge on. So when I saw Zippy and Ernest that morning, they were being towed, all 8 legs scrambling in a wild, backward, futile blur into the back room. When I picked them up that night, they were a pair of hurtin' cowpokes. Ernest, who had a growth removed, was limping badly. Plus, we had to put a plastic bag on her legs so she couldn't lick her stitches off. And Zippy, to keep him from getting at his stitches, was wearing a large and very comical round plastic collar that looked like a satellite dish with Zippy's head sticking out of the middle. He had a lot of trouble getting around because his collar kept hitting things, such as the ground. For the next week, if you can, for the next week, if you came to my front door, here's what happened. You heard the loud barking of 2 dogs going into red alert mode, but you didn't see any immediate dogs. Instead, you heard a lot of bumping and clumping, which turned out to be the sound of a large dog limping frantically toward you, but suffering a major traction loss on every 4th step because of the plastic bag, combined with the sound of a very small dog trying desperately to keep up, but bonking his collar into furniture, doorways, etc. And then, finally, skidding around the corner, still barking, they appeared, the dynamic duo, Bagfoot and Satellite Head. During this week, I was not the least bit worried about burglars because if anyone had tried to break into my house, I would have found him the next morning lying on the floor, dead from laughter. That's Dave Barry for you. He's a very clever guy. And here in the same vein, kind of, because you never have too much smiling, right? Is something from an old friend that you might remember. His name is Art Linkletter, and he used to have a show on early television where he would line up about 6 kids of just probably not more than kindergarten or 1st grade age. And it was called Kids Say the Darndest Things. So this is from that show. It's called Kids Say the Darndest Things About Dogs. I believe all kids should have pets. It's an essential part of growing up. There's a mystic kinship between a boy and his dog, a sharing of love and trust that's unique. A boy's dog is a pal, a companion, a comforter when tears come, and the best listener to whispered secrets. At the price of a dog tag and a bowl of food each day, a pup's probably the biggest bargain in a kid's life. Children love to talk about their pets, and with characteristic freedom, they weave many fanciful tales of improbable goings-on. There was a girl who was befuddled about the sweet mysteries of life. Do you have pets? I asked her. Yes, we have a dog that just laid 6 puppies. Do you have a pet? I asked one youngster. A dog. Does he have a pedigree? Sure, lots of them. How do you know? Because he bites himself all the time. Perhaps the answer that brought the biggest laugh from our listeners on this fateful pedigree question was this exchange. Do you have any pets? Yes, a cat and a dog. Do they have pedigrees? No, we took them out. One link in my own family chain loves dogs, so when he saw a magnificent St. Bernard on a leash, he rushed up, hugged him, and then began to stroke his long, bushy tail. Moments later, his mother came along and was horrified to see her child clutching the tail of a tremendous animal. Get away from that beast, she shouted. He'll bite you. Oh, no, Mommy, he reassured her. This end never bites. On the other hand, one little 4-year-old cried bitterly when a large, friendly dog bounded up to him and licked his hands and his face. What is it, darling? His mother cried. Did he bite you? No, he replied, but he tasted me. Then there was little Susan, who was inclined to exaggeration. Her stories always seemed to be full of adventures, and she could never be talked into admitting the complete truth. One day, she was playing in the front yard when a fox terrier, belonging to a neighbor, darted at her playfully. With a shriek of fright, Susan fled to her mother and yelled, Mama, a great big lion ran down the street. He jumped over the fence and he almost ate me up. Susan, her mother said sternly, aren't you ashamed? Aren't you ashamed of yourself? I was sitting here at the window and saw the whole thing. Now you go in your room and you get down on your knees and confess that it was just a little pet dog and you lied to your mother. Ask the Lord to forgive you for your sin. Susan reluctantly went into her room and she shut the door. In less than a minute, she opened the door and poked her head out. It's all right, Mother, she said. I told God all about it, and he says he could hardly blame me. He thought it was a lion, too, when he first saw it. And while we're on the subject of children and animals, I love this quickie. Hurry, Mother, and come back, said little James when he saw his first snake. There's a tail wagging without any dog on it. Kids do say the darndest things. And here's one about a different kind of animal. And I don't know if any of you had your pets, but lots of people have all kinds of different pets. And this one is for the bird lovers. The truth about Annie. Taco, an orange-winged Amazon parrot, came to us as a rescue bird. Taco had started to pluck. He tore at his back with such a vengeance that he made himself ill. The cost of treating him was beyond his owner's financial capability, so we agreed to take him. We picked him up at the veterinarian's office after he and his owner had said their final goodbyes. The essential elements for beautiful feathers and a healthy bird are sound nutrition and a lot of love. We introduced Taco to the diet that our birds thrive on, and within a few days, he lost interest in his back and began playing with the wooden toys in his cage. By the end of the first week, he was fully acclimated to the food, his cage, and his neighbors, Gideon, a double yellow-headed Amazon, and Tut, a Mexican red-headed Amazon. Taco accepted the constant handling, bathing, and talking going on around him without any hesitation. 2 weeks passed, and Taco began acting like a normal Amazon parrot, with one exception. He wasn't talking. In fact, he wasn't making any sounds. This is highly unusual for an Amazon. Most parrots will mimic what they hear in their own environment. A cat's meow, a creaky door, and depending on the parrot, even an entire sentence. Taco didn't whistle or squeak. He was completely silent. I decided to give him 1 more week and then take him back to the vet for a more thorough checkup. Friday mornings are bath and cage cleaning day at our house. This particular Friday, I decided Taco was ready for his first community bath. I opened his cage and put my hand in, and he stepped onto my finger. I held him at eye level and I said, Taco, aren't you ever going to talk? He cocked his head to one side, fluffed his feathers, and he said, Annie died. Poor Annie. Annie is bleeding. The shock was immense. I think my mouth was hanging open. I know the ghost bumps were visible on my arms. Hurrying through the baths and the cleaning of the cages, I finally able to call our vet and ask for Taco's previous owner's telephone number. I had to know who Annie was. And Taco, had he witnessed a crime? Had a member of his household died? Maybe he was talking about another animal that lived in one of his previous homes. I called Taco's most recent owner and told her what Taco had said. And she said she had never heard him say that or anything else during the 4 years she had owned him. She definitely didn't know anyone named Annie. She gave me the name and telephone number of the previous person whom she had bought Taco from. After a short conversation with this owner, It was clear he had never heard Taco say a word the entire time he had owned him either. That was one of the reasons he had sold Taco. He wanted a bird that talked, and Taco never did. He had purchased Taco from a breeder near Chico, California, but he couldn't remember the breeder's name, and it seemed I was at a dead end. In the meantime, Taco was becoming more vocal and was adding to his tale about Annie. His new version was, "Annie died. Annie died. Poor Annie, she is bleeding. Oh, poor Annie." The president of our bird club gave me some names and numbers of breeders in that area where Taco came from. Each phone call led to another dead end, but I wouldn't give up. I was determined to get to the bottom of this. My husband suggested that I call the library in Chico and check the local newspaper obituaries going back to the time that Taco might have lived there. The reference librarian was intrigued with this story that Taco was telling and was very helpful. She said she would call her brother, who worked for the police department, and ask him to check their records as well. 2 days passed, and the librarian hadn't called. Taco repeated his story so many times that our Congo Greys, Jack and Jill, started saying, "Poor Annie! Poor Annie!" Spurred on by the growing chorus of poor Annies, I decided to check on the librarian's progress. She answered on the first ring. "Have you found anything?" I asked. "No, I'm sorry," she said. "My brother went back 15 years in the records, and he couldn't find anything either." She took a brief breath and then said, "Are you sure the bird is saying Annie?" I told her that at this point, that was the only thing of which I was sure. I thanked her for her help and I hung up. There was one more thing at this point I was certain of. Taco had heard about Annie somewhere. Birds do not make things up. Somehow Annie's plight had stuck in his memory. It was time to accept the fact that I might never find out who Annie was or what had happened to her. 2 months passed. Taco continued gaining weight and was becoming more and more affectionate. He feathered out to a brilliant green and his eyes were clear. His back was completely healed, and he continued talking about Annie. He talked about Annie from morning till evening. He didn't get goosebumps anymore. We just accepted what had happened to poor Annie. One evening, it was my turn to host our bird club meeting. The coffee and cookies were set out as everyone arrived. We gathered in the living room, which was next to the bird room, to discuss the fundraiser that was coming up. And suddenly a voice sounded loud and clear. "Poor Annie! Poor Annie died! Annie is bleeding! Poor Annie!" Startled, everyone stopped talking and listened. One of the club members turned to me and she said, "I thought you didn't like to watch soap operas." "I don't. What are you talking about?" she asked. "Annie," she said. "She died. I think Robert killed her." "No," another breeder chimed in. "It was Robert." It wasn't Robert, it was James. Don't you remember? He was having an affair with Annie's sister's neighbor." I left my fellow bird lovers while they discussed their favorite soap opera, and I walked to Taco's cage. Now it was clear that one of his owners had watched that same soap opera, and Taco had heard it too. He cocked his head to one side, looked at me, and said clearly, "Is Taco hungry? Do you want me to scratch your head?" The mystery of Annie finally solved. He was ready to discuss something else. Today, Taco has a mate, another orange-winged Amazon named Belle. And when they had their first baby, we had to name her Annie. Well, that was a sweet story about birds for you bird lovers. And I hope you're enjoying these animal stories. They're great fun to read, and it just is a different perspective. I will get back to the moth. That's still one of my favorite things to do. But I just thought in this time of semi-lockdown, it would be good to have some interesting animal stories. Because I know for me, because I have two dogs, they keep me occupied, they keep me out walking, and they act silly all the time. So stay safe, take care of yourself, remember each other, and have a great day. Choose happy.